Welcome everyone back to the weekly weather podcast, and today we're going to be having a look at the winter of 1962-1963, known as the Big Freeze of 1963. One of the coldest winters we've ever had, truly exceptional conditions, and to think it was only just under 60 years ago. Truly exceptional conditions, and we're having a look at that in today's podcast. I want to thank channel members, of course, for helping me out, and of course this video was recommended and commented by a channel member. So if you do want to, if you do have any ideas for a podcast, any suggestions, make sure you get down in the comments below. And of course, if you are watching this on a Friday, do remember, if you sign up for channel membership, only $1.99, of course, you can view this earlier than the general public on a Wednesday. So if we do get into the podcast, we'll of course talk about the winter of 1962-1963. Truly exceptional month, and it's really quite historic. However, many people who were around then remember it vividly, very much the older generation. So I do suspect many people listening to this don't really know much about it. May have seen some charts from it, may have heard some stats, but I'll be going through what we saw with that winter. Now, I have a family member who was around then working, and he told me that his biggest memory from it was basically the ground froze and it didn't thaw for 3 months. Now, in the UK at the moment, we don't really get massive cold weather. I mean, we're always looking at the charts, looking when the next potentially northerly wind or maybe an easterly wind coming, and we think of major cold as something like the Beast from the East back in 2018, sort of 5 to 7 days, depending on where you are, of bitterly cold conditions and heavy snowfall. Now, the winter of 1962-1963 was a different beast, I must say. It was pretty much, I wouldn't say on the same scale as the Beast from the East, but it was near enough those sort of conditions for 2.5 months. Freezing cold conditions, and it was just truly exceptional. And I've looked at all the CET charts, and it really is just exceptional, the temperatures. So remember, the winter meteorologically goes December, January, February. So that's what we're looking at. Some people may look at the astronomical winter, which of course ends in March, but we're, for purely statistical basis, which the Met Office use, we'll be looking at December, January, February. Now, December of 1962 was pretty cold. It wasn't exceptionally cold. There were many winters in and around that period that were as cold, a few colder. Again, it was definitely on the colder end of the spectrum, but it was 1.8 degrees for the CET. If we got that now, we would think that is truly exceptional. But to think that's almost 2.5 degrees milder than December 2010, the December to remember, some say. However, it was really the January, February that was cold. 1963, January, minus 2.1 for the CET, and the February was minus 0.7, which is the same CET as December 2010. So I think December 2010 for 2 months, and over 2 months, because the end of December 1962 was truly cold. So I think December 2010 for 2.5 months, and even colder than that in January. Now, I've also got some stats. Have a look at sort of it ranked in terms of all conditions from 1659 to 2022. Now, the December of 1962 was very cold, as I said, but it is 40th from 1659 to 2022. So it's cold, very much on the cold end of the spectrum, but there's 39 other Decembers colder than it. And of course, December 2010 is second on that, only behind 1890. But looking at January and February, they're both in the top 10. January 1963 is 5th coldest January on Met Office records, minus 2.1, only being beaten by temperatures of minus 2.8 in 1740, minus 2.9 in 1814, minus 3 in 1684, and minus 3.1 in 1795. So hundreds of years ago. So it was the coldest January for 150 years since 1814. So truly, truly exceptional. And of course, the February was a bit milder than January, but it was still below freezing for February, which only 10 have ever done. And if we have a look at it, it's ranked 7th on coldest Februaries ever. And of course, there are quite some other cold Februaries in the 1900s. Of course, 1956 was minus 0.2, so a bit milder, but of course, we have 1986 minus 1.1, 1947 minus 1.9, which is the coldest February on record, but many of the others are in the 1800s, 1700s, and 1600s. So, yeah, truly, truly exceptional being on consecutive months. And if we do rank it all together in terms of December, January, February, it is the third coldest meteorological winter ever. And only one of 3 that's got a CT of below freezing. And just for comparison, second was in 1740, minus 0.4, and first was 1684, truly, truly exceptional, minus 1.17 for December, January, February. And of course, 1963 is minus 0.33. And that is just, yeah, truly, truly, truly cold. And the coldest winter, in the 2000s was 2010, 2.43, and it's ranked 59th from 1659 to 2021. So a solid 3 degrees milder than 1963. And 2010, remember, doesn't include the December, remember. It's December 2009, January 2010, and February 2010. So really cold months in 2010 and 2009, but nowhere near on the scale of 1963. Truly, truly cold. And again, as I said, these months minus CETs. And just for comparison, January 2021, which was a pretty chilly month, below average, was 3.1 for the CT. 5 degrees colder. It's 5 degrees milder than 1963. Imagine that, 5 degrees. And I know some people may say, 2021 January really wasn't that cold, but it's the coldest we've had since 2010. So, yeah, really, really exceptional. And of course, some would say it is the changing climate. There are some factors, of course, that you could say contribute to a changing climate. But there's another factor that I do want to bring up, because many may not suggest it, but it's an important factor that did contribute to this very much. Now, it was in the time when we didn't have great satellites. Satellites had only just been launched for weather forecasting, and there was none of this seasonal models or anything more than maybe 5 to 7 days, really, in terms of any detailed forecasting. So, very much, if you were in this winter, you would have looked at the weather forecast, and it would have just been cold, 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 never-ending cold. An interesting fact, pretty much the first morning that didn't have a frost in Britain. So every morning had a frost in Britain until the 6th of March. So the first 60 plus odd days of 1963 had frost. And that's just truly exceptional, considering now we're struggling to get more than maybe 5 days in a month of frosts in some places. But yeah, it was just a really, truly, truly cold month, and no one really knew when it was going to end. But as I said, there were some sort of factors that made it more likely than now. One of those factors very much was the smog. Now, some may suggest that it didn't contribute that much, but I would argue that it did. I've had a look at the analysis from NOAA at the pressure charts, and of course, as I said, we're not in the satellite era here, so there very much is a lot of inconsistencies, a lot of uncertainties with this exact positioning. But having a look at those, basically high pressure was blocking to our north for 2.5 months. Now, of course, sometimes it did drop southwards, and we stayed under high pressure, but it wasn't. It was pretty blocked for the whole time. It was very, very cold, but it wasn't like a consistent easterly wind every single day of 2.5 months. There were times where we did see high pressure topple and just see high pressure sitting over the top of the UK. But because we have very cold air masses, And of course, we had a lot of smog around, as these were the last few days, last few years, of, some would argue, the great smog in London. It meant we had very, very foggy conditions under the high pressure. And with the cold air masses we had at times, it basically meant at the surface, once you had those cold air masses for a few days, maybe 5 days to a week or so, the surface got cooled down sufficiently that whenever milder air came in above it for a few days, for example, a bit of a westerly wind for a time, high pressure toppled, bringing in milder air, it stayed very cold at the surface. And this wouldn't be something we'd see as much now because we don't have as much smog and fog. So we'd see more mixing of air now. So if we did see a similar pressure pattern to 1962, 1963, we very much probably would be a little bit milder. We'd still have the really cold incursions, because I'm not saying that it wasn't cold. We did have, in that period of time, very, very cold northerly and easterly bouts. But it was in between those bouts, because you can't get blocking to sit to our north the whole time. It does sink southwards and then shoot northwards again in cycles. So in between those cycles, the high pressure would have toppled, but because we had smog and fog, it kept those temperatures down. Whereas now, we wouldn't have as much smog and fog. We'd see more mixing of air masses, and we would see temperatures lift. Whereas then, temperatures would stay around freezing, even though the upper air temperatures were milder. We weren't seeing bitterly cold spells. As I said, it was just before we saw the clean air legislation, and that basically reduced the use of coal fires, which at the time had their full effect. And it just meant that we just had cold air were established for 2.5 months. And as you're listening to this, we're going through a sort of a high pressure, cold, frosty pattern. And I think now some areas with fog around are going to be seeing highs of maybe 1, 2, 3 degrees by the end of this week, Friday, Saturday time, 1 or 2 degrees under that fog. And we don't have that much smog around relative to 1962, I must say. Some may argue the air is polluted significantly, but nowhere near as much, at least in around cities areas, as it was in 1962, 1963. And to think, imagine we had this sort of foggy, smoggy conditions, worse than we're seeing this week, around for 2.5 months, because that's basically what happened. Whenever there wasn't easterly or northerly winds, we had high pressure sit over the top of the country with frost and fog, keeping those temperatures really, really quite cold. So yeah, it was really, really cold in terms of just consistency. But we also did have, of course, a lot of snow mixed in with it. Now, the beginning of December wasn't too cold. It had cold bouts, but it wasn't bitterly cold. There was a wintry outbreak, which brought snow on the 12th to the 13th of December, but it really was toward the Christmas time where things really cooled down. That's why the CET was 1.8, because the start wasn't that cold, but the end really was. A cold easterly wind set in on the 22nd of December, as we saw Scandinavian high built in, drawing the air in from Russia, a beast from the east pattern, but not on the scale of beast from the east, but cold enough to keep temperatures below freezing. And that Scandinavian high, as I said, can't hold on forever, and it did eventually collapse. And of course, frost and fog under that kept temperatures low, before that high moved back towards Iceland, bringing in northerly winds, and there we saw significant snowfall across many parts of the country, southern England, heavy snow 26th, 27th, and that was pretty much the start of the cold spell, and it didn't let up until early March. And again, as I said, heavy snow on the end of December. There was blizzards across southwest England and Wales, massive snow drifts, 20 feet, gale force winds, and many areas seeing many inches of snow. And of course, you see these exceptional stats of drifts of 15 feet, 20 feet. Again, that was in localized areas, but many areas seeing 5-6 inches of snow plus in a few areas. And of course, January with average temperature of -2.1, 28.2 degrees Fahrenheit. That really is exceptional. As I said, coldest month since January 1814. And yeah, it was truly exceptional. Again, most of the country was frozen for that whole month. Very little thawing at all. And as I said, freezing fog was the hazard for most areas. Of course, there was heavy snowfall around at times, but it was that freezing fog, smog, that just kept those temperatures down. And one thing some people do, I've seen some people ask about, some people regularly do talk about, is are we going to see sea freezing anytime soon? And in 1963, we saw the sea froze for a mile at Herney Bay in Kent. And it was, truly, truly exceptional. Seeing sea freezing, that's something we wouldn't even think about now, considering we normally don't get colder conditions lasting more than 3 to 5 days. So really, really exceptional. And of course, it was kind of devastating, not only for humans in terms of we had a lot of disruption around, but for also animals. I'm seeing some facts here, like with the sea freezing, it was damaging a lot of water birds, and a lot of estuaries, shallow sea froze over, damaging a lot of sea life, animals, because of course this isn't regular occurrence. This was a truly exceptional winter, even though it's in a colder period in terms of UK climate, i.e. months, i.e. 50, 100 years ago, we generally had colder winters than we have now. This was truly on the exceptional end. Whether you speak 1800s, 1900s or 2000s, this would be truly exceptional. And yeah, it was really, really quite damaging. And for example, the sea froze out 4 miles in Dunkirk, so across the channel. And of course, River Thames froze over as well. Didn't freeze in central London though. And of course, that was a bit down to the changes that we've seen over the course of the 1900s, because a lot of people would argue, how can the River Thames freeze over so significantly in 1800s? We haven't seen anything like that. Even small little freezes we don't see anymore. And not only because it was down to the temperatures, but also down to the architecture and the infrastructure in London. One thing some people do sort of miss is that a lot of the London bridges we had, including London Bridge, had a lot more support structures within the water. And if you think about that, that sort of slows down the flow of the River Thames, and on where the water stops at those support structures in the water, where the water is much slower, that's where we start to see freezing, and then that slowly spreads. Whereas now, with more structures having better sort of engineering, we're seeing less supports. That means the river can flow faster and less stagnant water, and that means it takes a lot colder conditions to freeze. So it's a sort of an effect that sort of adds up, and that is something we're not going to see that anymore. We're not going to see the River Thames freeze over, because even in 1962, 1963, upper reaches of the River Thames froze, but in central London it didn't. And of course, seeing stats here, says a bit due to thermal stations, and of course the support structures and arches in many of the bridges, which had obstructed the river's flow at times. Now the river flowed much faster and didn't allow it to freeze, but we did still see some freezing. So if you were around there, you would have seen most sort of lakes, ponds freeze over, and River Thames in periods and at sort of positions, especially upstream, did freeze. And of course, we're seeing a lot of dangerous conditions. And for example, we saw some people even skating on upper estuaries of the Thames, in Oxford, on some of the small estuaries, and of course, see truly exceptional images. And of course, this is a podcast, I can't show you these images, but yeah, massive icicles, some sort of meter long, and yeah. One stat here, on the 25th of January, there was a brief thaw that lasted 3 days. So imagine that, on the 25th of January, there was a 3-day thaw. To think now it's kind of the opposite. Most of the month there's a thaw, and we may get 3 or 4 days here or there of freezing conditions. Really, really exceptional. And of course, February continued. Again, it was a little bit milder, not quite as cold, but we saw, again, blizzards, heavy snowfall, and significant winds, of course. And as I said, as we get to early March, we see temperatures rise to 17 degrees on the 6th of March as the snow disappeared, as we saw a balmy southerly wind move up all the way down from the Azores, something similar we saw on New Year's this year. So we're seeing that pattern on the 6th of March, and that really gave a bit of a flip, a sort of flicked a switch and turned things much milder. Now, March wasn't mild by any means. The CET was, I think, just over 6 degrees, which is chilly. I mean, the CET so far this January has been around 6 degrees. It is cooling, of course, but it is around 6 degrees at the moment. So to think the first sort of 10 days we've had of January, imagine that for a whole month. And that's what March was like. And that was really mild compared to the previous month. So it just puts it all into perspective. And of course, one of the big things with the winter of 1962-1963 was just the disruption. As I said, the ground was pretty much frozen for 3 months, 2.5 months straight. I mean, football games, rugby games, all sport really was cancelled for quite a period of time, weeks and weeks. And of course, there was no undersoil heating then, so there really wasn't much anyone could do. To think about the virus lockdowns we've had, where the country almost comes to a stall, where there's nothing we can do. It's similar here, but for the weather. There's nothing we could have done to this to stop this. We don't have underfloor heating, and of course, this just continued for weeks and weeks on end. Just truly an exceptional event, and I don't think we'll see this again for decades, centuries, millennia, potentially. Again, just truly exceptional. And yeah, going on more about what do I think? Do I think this is going to happen again? No. In our climate right now, I very much doubt this will happen again. If the similar pressure patterns happen again, I do think we'd see colder conditions, but I don't think it would be anywhere near as exceptional as this. As I said again, following on from sort of a lot of smog and fog we've had, I don't think it would be possible to see these sort of conditions again, because in the winter of 1962-1963 there were milder patches where milder air did come in, but because of the frost, fog, smog at the surface, it held those temperatures down, as I've said. And we won't be seeing that now because we don't get as much fog now as we have less of those pollutants in the air. So it almost makes it a little bit impossible to be seeing these sort of conditions. And of course, the upper air pressure charts and air masses we did see, regardless of the smog at the surface, were truly exceptional. One sort of analogy I came up with is to have a look at the GFS GFS pub run or any of the ensemble runs. Look at the most extreme runs where they go for 2 weeks of bitterly cold conditions, and we always look at those and think, massive cold outlier, never going to happen. But always fun to have a look at it, just run through the charts. Imagine that came off for 2.5 months. That's what I'm thinking. -10 at 850 HPA, in around that sort of conditions for 2.5 months. Just, yeah, I don't think we'll see this ever again. Not only, as I said, because of the smog and fog, but because of our changing climate. It's becoming much harder to see these blocking patterns. And one thing that is quite honestly difficult to say about this is we don't know exactly what caused it. As I said, the satellite era was only just starting. So not only was our forecasting pretty shoddy at the time, we don't have a lot of ability to see intricate details. What was happening, for example, in the Pacific Ocean with the ENSO regions, the QBO? Were we seeing an early season stratospheric warming? Because that could have been something that really sort of enhance this. We could have had natural blocking patterns similar to sort of December 2010, and if we saw some stratospheric warming on top of that, that could have changed things in our favour. And again, there will be theories out there will be people saying, oh, this is what happened, but no one truly knows what exactly caused it. And even now, no one knows exactly what causes our day-to-day conditions. We can, of course, make assumptions because of certain correlations we have, and of course there are causations from what's happening in the Pacific can impact, of course, the Atlantic, and we can sort of move those things over. But even now we don't have much assurances beyond day 7, because things, of course, do cause and correlate, but it's not exact science. So to think with all the data we have now, we can't forecast that well in a week or 2 weeks' time. We can to a decent level, but not that well. Even now we're looking at cold conditions potentially next week, on some models, and others not even hinting at it at all. So I really don't think we'll ever find out what exactly caused this. We're gonna have good guesses, but it just was truly, truly exceptional. I don't think we'll see anything like this ever again, at least for the next few decades, few centuries. We'd have to see a massive climate shift to much colder conditions. Because, of course, with the warming climates, regardless of what you think of that, the climate is generally warming. Whether it's going to be a catastrophe or not, you could argue whether it is or whether it isn't, but no one can argue that temperatures are increasing on average globally. So the air to our north is a couple of degrees milder than it would have been in 1962, 1963. So we would need now, and on top of the sort of the smog issue as well, we now need truly, truly exceptional pressure charts that are almost impossible to come off, to be seeing these sort of CETs for 2.5 months straight. So yeah, I don't think this will come off, and the only thing that could cause this is if we have a complete backwards trend in our climate. If we did see a massive climate shift, now I don't want to say a catastrophe by any means, but something on that scale would need to happen if we were going to see some sort of winter similar to this. We'd, of course, see a month, maybe, similar to December 2010, where it's truly exceptional for 3 or 4 weeks. But there's sort of 10 weeks plus of consistent freezing conditions. I don't think we will see. Even December 2010, we saw truly exceptional freezing conditions for 3, 5, 7 days at a time, small thaw, and then 3, 5, 7 days again at a time. So even December 2010 didn't have the consistency we saw in 1962, 1963, even though you'd argue 20 to 25 out of those 31 days were bitterly cold. So yeah, the only thing that I think would cause this, of course, is a climate catastrophe, something like the North Atlantic drift shutting down, sort of oceanic circulations potentially. If those things shut down, we could be seeing something like this, but I don't think we will be seeing any colder conditions like this, unless, of course, we had, as I said, a complete sort of climate shutdown in sort of a catastrophe, which I don't want to say it will happen, but there is a lot of simulations, guesses out there that with a warming climate, it could shut down certain ocean circulations, and it could put us into an ice age. That's what some people argue, but on the other hand, many people just argue that we're just going to generally have a milder climate over the next few decades, next few centuries, and no one truly knows what is going to happen. And that's the beauty of these sort of forecasting, and it's amazing to look back at these sort of events. We will see colder conditions again. We will see something similar to December 2010. Again, we will see more beasts from the easts over the next few years, few decades, and over the next century. But I really doubt we will see anything truly as exceptional as the winter of 1962, 1963. It was just something that if we saw it now, we'd all be going crazy. It would be, if we saw it now, we would not stop talking about it for years, as it did shut down the country. And to think if that happened now with the whole satellite era, everyone having phones, computers, all the news, this would just spread so quickly, and we would just be, it would just truly exceptional event, and I don't think it will happen again. So yeah, very, very interesting. Have a look back at this. So thank you to the channel member who recommended it. Very, very truly exceptional winter, as I've said. I don't know, a lot of snow lovers out there would love to see something similar to this, but as I've said before, with certain events like the Beast from the East, these things, although they are enjoyable for snow for a few days, maybe a week, it does become truly disruptive. The freezing conditions, at least now with the energy prices, would send gas prices, electricity prices through the roof. So I think even though many people enjoy some snow, if we saw anything like this ever again, or anything similar to this, it really would not be fun. Even coming from a snow lover like me, it really would not be fun. And I do definitely hope we don't see anything truly exceptional like this, even though, as I said, it may be fun for a few days. So anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you do have any recommendations, do get down in the comments. So I'm open to any recommendations for videos over the next few weeks and few months. Again, I want to keep this nice, chilled out, just talking through future events, past events, or anything happening at the current period. Because remember, in a week's time, be our current weather patterns, anything can change. As I said, we really don't know the specific forecast, maybe more than 5 or 7 days ahead at the moment. We, of course, had the Christmas flip, which was really, really frustrating. And I do suggest, and I do think we'll be seeing similar sort of model outputs over the next few weeks with colder conditions suggested, but whether they come off is really, really going to be interesting to see. As I said, nowhere near on the scale of 1962, 1963, but we could be seeing colder conditions maybe over the next few weeks, the next month or two. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Remember, if you want to see this early on Wednesday, make sure you sign up for channel membership, $1.99, really cheap. Of course, get these podcasts early, get replied comments guaranteed, and of course, stickers, emojis, all of that. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again for another podcast next week.